Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and it's that time of the week again where we recap some of the major tournaments, and today we're going to be looking at the Star City Games Columbus Open, as well as the 3 different classic tournaments that occurred there. Now, we have the Open, which is a Team Trios event. One player played Standard, one played Modern, one played Legacy. We'll be looking at those top 8 decks. And then we had a Modern Classic, a Standard Classic, and a Legacy Classic going on as well. Now, we're going to have a special spotlight on the cards from Guilds of Ravnica that are in these top 8 decks. As a matter of fact, there's 48 unique cards from Guilds of Ravnica that have showed up in these top 8s. We'll take a look at all of them and give you the deck list of some of these key decks. Quickly before we get started though, just a fast reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to help support the channel. Our Patreon page is down there. You're also going to find links to products on Amazon. Anything you purchase there, no matter what it is, actually, we'll get a small percentage. Finally, Flipside Gaming still offering a promo code for our viewers. Hopefully you can save some cash. They're doing pre-orders right now for guild kits for folks that are looking for those. With that being said, as always, thank you not only to the folks that look at those links, but to all the viewers. Y'all make the channel what it is, and I appreciate you all. But let's get into it. We'll begin with some Standard. I know that's the main event. That's what you want to see. So we're going to look at the Star City Games Open Standard decks first. But remember, this is a Team Trio event. We're going to look at the Modern and Legacy in just a little bit. But sometimes you could have a weaker Standard deck that got propped up a little bit from the other 2 decks on that team. Just keep that in mind as we go through. So coming in first, as well as second, was Selesnya Tokens. 3rd place, 4th place, and 6th place was, yes, Mono Red Aggro, although it is a little different. We'll take a look at the deck list. 5th place is Boros Aggro, although we're going to see in just a moment, they called it Boros Aggro here, but you could argue it's actually more of a Boros Angels build. And 7th place, Esper Control. 8th place, Golgari Midrange. Alright, let's start looking at some of these deck lists. Beginning with Selesnya Tokens. Alright, this is a deck that a lot of people thought would do well going into the first weekend, and it didn't disappoint, coming in 1st and 2nd, at least in this particular event for Standard decks. And you can see here, there's a lot of influence, as you would imagine, from Guilds of Ravnica. You still see some of the older cards here that play a big role. Legion's Landing, for example, History of Benalia has been a big card. Those are both 4-ofs in the main. You're going to find a couple of Shalai, Voice of Plenty's here. There are a number of cards outside of Guilds of Ravnica here, but let's zero in on some of those Guilds cards. 8 cards altogether from Guilds in the main, none in the sideboard of this deck, but you're going to find Venerated Loxodon, District Guide, Amara Soul of the Accord, Tristani Discordant, Flower and Flourish, March of the Multitudes, Conclave Tribunal, that's looked great in this new format so far, and finally a Shockland with Temple Garden. Alright, let's look at the 3rd place version of this Mono Red Aggro deck. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, oh no, not Mono Red Aggro again. And yeah, there are some of the usual suspects here. Just look at the deck list. Vyashino Pyromancer, Rekindling Phoenix, you get 2 of those in the main, 2 in the sideboard, so 4 altogether. You're going to get to Lava Runners, Goblin Chain Whirlers, 4 of those in the main. So you're very familiar with many of these cards. On the spell side, you get Lightning Strikes, you get Shocks, Wizard's Lightning. Ultimately, though, this deck did lose a lot of good cards, but it also had some replaced with Guilds of Ravnica cards. So let's take a look at those. Runaway Steamkin is here, and that is just a fantastic 2-drop that starts off small and fragile, but as time goes on, it quickly becomes bigger and can put the pressure on. Risk Factor. We knew this was going to be good, right? Very similar to Browbeat in many ways, but it has Jumpstart. It's at instant speed for 3. In an aggro deck, it just puts tons of pressure on your opponent. It does give them the choice, but in the right deck, both of those choices are going to be real bad, and that's what this card does here. Finally, Experimental Frenzy in the main. This card looked amazing as well. In these type of decks where you can empty your hand, play this, and then keep playing off the top of your deck, you can have some huge turns. Basically, as long as you have mana, you just keep playing cards until you reach a point where you hit your 2nd land. Now, yeah, there's some variance there. Some turns will be better than others, but in this type of deck, it's very, very solid. In the sideboard, we found Legion Warboss, another copy of Risk Factor, another copy of Experimental Frenzy, and Lava Coil. Now, this is a sorcery speed removal spell that does 4 to a creature, but it only costs 2, and beyond that, it exiles the creature if it dies that turn. So it's really nice against cards like Rekindling Phoenix, for example. This will be very solid in the format. Let's look at the next deck. Now, this one, they called it Boros Aggro. To me, this is more of a Boros Angels build, though. You'll see the difference in a few moments. We'll look at another deck, which I would consider more of a Boros Aggro deck later. But as for right now, the reason I feel like this is more of a Angels deck is because you have 3 Shalais, 4 Lyras, 3 Aurelias, 4 Resplendent Angels. Feels very Angel tribal to me overall. Not as quick as some of the more aggressive builds we're going to see in just a moment. But with that being said, this is a very, very solid build. And outside of the Angels, it does feel very aggressive. You got Knight of Grace in there for History of Benalia again for Lightning Strike. And let's take a look at the other cards from Guilds of Ravnica. As I mentioned previously, Aurelia, Exemplar of Justice is here. Deafening Clarion makes the cut. Conclave Tribunals here yet again, and Sacred Foundry. Out of the sideboard, you get another copy of Deafening Clarion. Esper Control came in 7th place. Now, this is a deck that in some ways looks familiar. Much like Mono Red Aggro, this deck lost some pieces, but it was backfilled nicely with things from Guilds of Ravnica. This particular version is running a Chromium the Mutable in the main, as well as 4 Teferi Hero of Dominarias as their win conditions. And let's look at some of these Guilds cards. You'll find Ritual of Soot, awesome conditional sweeper, Chemist's Insight for some card draw, Disdainful Stroke, of course, back in Standard again. This did some work last time was in Standard. No doubt it will continue to be seen a lot going forward. Sinister Sabotage makes it in as a 3 casting cost counterspell, which also lets you surveil. And then Watery Grave is your shock land. Nothing from Guilds in the sideboard here, though. All in the main. And 8th place, we got a Golgari mid-range deck. Kind of interesting that Golgari didn't do at least a little bit better. It felt like that's where a lot of the attention was going into this weekend. We do have one here in 8th place, though, and there was a lot of high finishes in both this as well as the Classic, so we'll see how this evolves in the coming weeks. As you can see here, a lot of influence from the new set, of course, but some familiar cards too. 4 Ravenous Chupacabra, 4 Merfolk Branchwalker, 4 Jadelight Ranger. So a lot of these cards that we're used to seeing, many of these were showing up in the Constrictor decks in the past. But of course, this is a new twist on things. When it comes to Planeswalkers, you're going to find a copy of Vivian Reed in the main, also one in the sideboard. 2 copies of Vraska Relic Seeker. That's one of those cards that a lot of people were paying close attention to coming into this weekend to see if it made it there. Yeah, looks like it did pretty well. I got 2 copies in the main in this deck. We'll see if that sustains. For Guilds of Ravnica cards, another Planeswalker, Vraska Golgari Queen. You have Burglar Rat, you have District Guide, Golgari Fine Broker, Izonai Thousand-Eyed, Find and Finality, and Overgrown Tomb. Out of the sideboard, you're going to find Plague Crafter and Ritual of Soot. Okay, let's move on to the Standard Classic. So you're going to see here some of the decks that we talked about from the previous tournament, but also a few different ones, and we'll zero in on those ones that are different. Coming in 1st place was Boros Angels. That also came in 4th place here. 2nd place was Grixis Control. 3rd place was Mono Red Aggro, the only one this time in the top 8. In 5th place, we get Boros Aggro. 6th place, Jeskai Control. 7th place, Golgari Midrange. And 8th place, Mono Blue Aggro. Overall, you do see a lot of aggro decks, control builds sneaking in their mid-range, but there are a lot of variants on them. So at least for week 1, there's a lot of promise as to the diversity of the format. We'll have to see what happens going forward, though, as things tighten up. So let's look at some of these decks that we didn't previously look at. 2nd place, Grixis Control. A lot of people are wondering if Nicol Bolas will do anything in this new meta. Well, here's a deck that wants the card, 4 of them in the main, so fans of that card should be happy. Here's a deck for you. But aside from that, you're going to see a lot of the cards we knew were good before. I mean, a lot of the control elements like Syncopates, the Eldest Reborn, Essence Scatter, those type of cards are all here. What's new? Quite a few, actually. Dream Eater, that's a very solid control finisher. It's a little expensive at 6, but it has flash, and it just does so much when it enters the battlefield. Ritual of Soot shows up here. Notion Rain, Thought Erasure, Steam Vents, and Watery Grave. Out of the sideboard, Thief of Sanity makes an appearance, as well as Disdainful Stroke. 5th place, Boros Aggro. To me, this is more of an aggro deck. You still have some Angels with Lyra and Aurelia, but if you look at the rest of this list, it feels a lot more like small aggressive creatures. We're going to see a lot of new ones that are entering from Guilds of Ravnica, of course, with Boros being one of the big focuses, but you also have some familiar cards like History of Benalia, Lightning Strike, Legion's Landing, and such. Let's look at those Guilds cards. In the main, Aurelia, Exemplar of Justice, Boros Challenger, Swiftblade Vindicator, Tajik Legion's Edge, Integrity and Intervention, Justice Strike and Sacred Foundry. In the sideboard, Lava Coil, Dawn of Hope shows up here, and even a copy of Experimental Frenzy. It won't be quite as good in a deck like this compared to the Mono Red Aggro deck, but you could still have some big turns with it. Jeskai Control coming in 6th place. A lot of people were speculating that Control might switch over to Jeskai more and more. There are some really good cards here. A couple of the creatures from guilds that we'll look at in just a few moments. When it comes to planeswalkers, we have Ral Izzet Viceroy, more on that in a second. Of course, 3 Teferis, which you would expect. It just remains to be seen whether people will gravitate more to this one over, say, the Esper variant, or even just an Azorius control deck over time. We'll find out soon enough, but what's interesting about this deck is in the main, there's actually 11 cards from Guilds of Ravnica. I already mentioned Ral Izzet Viceroy. He's got his own slide because I couldn't fit him with the others. And here's the other 10 cards in the main deck. Crackling Drake, Niv Mizzet, Lava Coil, Deafening Clarion, Chemist's Insight, Sinister Sabotage, Ionize makes it, Justice Strike, Sacred Foundry, and Steam Vents. Sideboard, Legion Warboss, another copy of Lava Coil, Disdainful Stroke, and another copy of Justice Strike. 8th place, Mono Blue Aggro. This deck's kind of interesting. You're not going to see as many new cards here. This deck was around before, but it just never really broke through in that last meta. Does feel like it's positioned to be a lot better in this current meta, though. There's a lot of buzz with this deck going into the weekend. It feels kind of like an aggro tempo deck for the most part. One new card, though, in the main is Night Veil Sprite. Out of the sideboard, you'll find Disdainful Stroke. Okay, so that wraps up Standard. Let's move on to Modern, beginning with the Open. So this is the top 8 for the Open tournament, which again coincides with those 8 Standard decks we saw earlier. And later on, we'll see the Legacy decks. So this top 8 consisted of 1st place, Humans, 2nd place, Burn, 3rd and 7th place was Jeskai Control, 4th place was Mono Green Tron, 5th place, Elves, 6th place, Mardu Pyromancer, 8th place, Hollow One. Again, Modern just continues to be super diverse and healthy. Now let's talk about some Guilds of Ravnica influence, beginning with that Humans deck. So here it is, 1st place, Humans. You first look at this list and think, okay, yep, looks like a Humans deck. Nothing too surprising here. You got your Reflecting Mages, Champion of the Parish, your 4 Ether Vials, so on and so forth. However, there's one copy of a guy hiding in there. Tajik Legion's Edge actually made it into the Humans deck. Now out of the sideboard, we get Knight of Autumn, 2 copies. This is a card you're going to see a lot more frequently now that we're talking about Modern and Legacy, because basically a lot of decks are just replacing Reclamation Sage with this. Even though the color requirements are slightly more demanding, it's not too big of a deal in Modern or Legacy, or even Vintage for that matter, but it gives you so many more options than Reclamation Sage. Elf's deck came in 5th place, and guess what? We got some influence here as well. Again, you look at this, Collected Company, Elf deck, it even runs a Vizier of Remedies to go along with Devoted Druid, things you've seen before. However, in the sideboard, we get 2 copies of Knight of Autumn. Alright, let's move on to the Star City Games Classic Modern event. So again, a lot of diversity here. We see a lot of different decks. Coming in 1st place was Amulet Titan. 2nd place, Grixis Whir. That's a deck that's been kicking around for a while. You see it a lot of Magic Online and such. And it's nice to see it put up a good result here. So maybe we'll see more of it in the future. 3rd and 4th was Burn. 5th, Jeskai Control. 6th, Dredge. 7th, Rakdos Vegevine or Bridgevine. 8th, Bant Spirits. Here we are looking at the 6th place Dredge deck, and not because Narcomoeba's in here. That's a reprint, so I won't count that. But there is a new card from Guilds of Ravnica that shows up and plays a big role. 4 copies of Creeping Chill. In a Dredge deck, basically a free 6-point life swing. Nothing wrong with that. And out of the sideboard, there you go, finally Assassin's Trophy. Now, Trophy didn't see as much play in these top 8s as a lot of people were predicting. I do think this will play a big role in Standard going forward, especially if the Golgari decks get a little bit better and they make some tweaks in the coming weeks. I think you'll just see more of these cards out there just generally. Now, when it comes to Modern and Legacy, especially Legacy, I don't know if this is going to take the place of Abrupt Decay all that often. Maybe I could see running one of these in the sideboard in conjunction with Abrupt Decays, just because the fact that Decay can't be countered is so critical in a format that has Force of Will and a lot of counter spells. Modern, it does feel more viable here because you don't have Force of Will, and there are times that I might want Abrupt Decay, but times where I might actually want this more frequently. So I could see this showing up in maybe 2 ofs like we see here in this particular sideboard. Alright, let's move on to Legacy, speaking of which, and what about this format? Are they running cards from guilds? Actually, they are running a few. Now, this is the open event, so again, this is part of the Team Trios event. 1st place, Grixis Control. 2nd place, 12 Post. 3rd place, Grixis Delver. 4th place, Death and Taxes. 5th place, Mono Red Prison. 6th place, Punishing Abzan. 7th place, another Grixis Control deck. 8th place, Miracles. Let's look at that Punishing Abzan deck that came in 6th place, though. A lot of cards in these Legacy decks, you almost have to squint. However, we get a couple cards from the new set in the sideboard. 1 copy of Knight of Autumn, and 1 copy of Assassin's Trophy. Finally, we'll round things out with a Legacy Classic event. A lot of diversity in this format as well. We have in 1st place, Rakdos Reanimator. 2nd place, Grixis Control. 3rd place, Omnitel. 4th place, Eldrazi Post. 5th place, Temur Delver. 6th place, Maverick. 7th place, Goblins. 8th place, another copy of Eldrazi Post. As for decks that were running some new cards, let's look at that 6th place Maverick deck to start things off. You might see it right off the bat at the top when you look at the creature list. Yep, Knight of Autumn made it to the main deck. There's also a copy in the sideboard as well. Goblins. Yeah, even the Goblins deck has some influence from Guilds of Ravnica. Now you look at this, again, you see all the usual suspects. Ringleader, Pile Driver, Matron, Lackey, so on and so forth. But there's one hiding in there. 2 copies in the main of Goblin Crater Maker from Guilds of Ravnica. Alright, with that being said, that's what we know from the Star City Games Columbus events. And I'm pretty excited to see what happens, especially in Standard going forward. It feels like a clean slate. It's always nice after rotation. You get the new set coming in, a lot of new cards being played, a lot of excitement. Things will tighten up in the coming weeks as people figure out what the best strategies are, of course. But right now, things are very diverse. We'll have to kind of see if that can last, though. Now, later in the week, once prices settle a little bit, I will be doing a special edition of the Market Watch looking just at Guilds of Ravnica cards to see how they were influenced by this weekend. Then later in the week, of course, we'll do our regular Market Watch as well. But until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.